Good afternoon. I think we're ready to start. Welcome, everyone, to this session on connected services linking small businesses to trade. Today's session actually marks the launch of ITC's flagship publication, the SME Competitiveness Outlook, which this year is titled Connected Services Competitive Businesses. I'm very pleased to be moderating this session that I hope will be very interactive, because I know it's been, busy 3 days or busy day with plenty of panels. And I'll start by very briefly introducing our panelists. To my right, Ms. Pamela Koch-Hamilton, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. To her right, Payal Dalal, Senior Vice President, Social Impact and International Markets at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. To my left, Vanessa Torre, Director of Foreign Economic Cooperation at the Ministry of Economic Development of Curacao. And last but not least, Emmanuel Emodek, Team Lead at ChapChap Africa, a fintech company in Uganda. Their full bios are online, so I will go straight to our program. But before we start, I'd like to invite you to a little bit of an icebreaker. We'll do a quick quiz, so please take your cell phones. And you also have on your desks the QR codes that may make it easier to connect. And we will have 4 questions on the board. You win points by obviously getting the right answer and also doing it fast. And the top 3 contestants will actually be awarded with beautiful scarves from small businesses, beneficiaries of ITC's Ethical Fashion Initiative. Nice. So get ready. Think we're good to go? Mm-hmm. Question number 1, guess the sector. 9 out of 10 firms in this sector are small. 95% of the world's unicorns are in this sector. And over 2/3 of the value of the smartphones you're using is produced by this sector. I guess the title of the session says it all.
Yeah.
Actually, most people online did too. Yay, services.
Yay. People actually chose agriculture. Right, who are the people?
Somehow you're going to have to prove that you have that name to get the award.
and boot face.
Question number 2. Services drove GDP growth in nearly X% of countries in 2019. 50, 60, 70, or 80? I hope you're following ITC on social media, because you have known all these answers.
Yes.
The answer is 80%. And Pingu is winning. Question number 3. These services sectors are the most digitalized and contributed the most to supply chains. I'll start reading because the answers are long. ICT, finance, construction and utilities, ICT, transport, utilities and wholesale, ICT, finance, business services and transport, finance, wholesale, transport and utilities. Which four are the most digitalized and contribute the most to supply chains? A tough one. Yay! ICT, finance, business services, and transport. Well done. Pingu keeps the lead. These four sectors are what ITC is calling in this new publication the connected services, and this leads us to question 4 and final question. In regions with poor connected services, poor quality connected services, 19% of all firms exported. In regions with good connected services, the share rises to 19 bad connected services versus X in regions with good connected services. Aha! The answer is 44%. Let's see who the winner is. Pingu! Pingu, Ciro, and Simba. Please come here after the session or now if you're already up. Pingu, come, please. I don't want to discourage you now, please, and get our applause. Ciro and Simba can also come and collect your prize. Congratulations to the winners. You also get a free copy of our report. So this quiz introduced us to the connected services, which are key to economic transformation, and also the topic of our flagship report this year. To get you warmed up on the topic and give you an overview of our report, let's just watch a very short video.
Have you thought about what you are really having for breakfast? You're having services. 2/3 of your smartphone's value is made up of services such as software development, transport, and insurance. The news you're reading, that's about services too. Writing, producing, and broadcasting. And your coffee, most of its value comes from services such as roasting techniques, certification, distribution, and branding. Surprised? You shouldn't be. As of 2019, services drove growth in nearly 80% of countries. But not all services are the same. 4 sectors, which we call connected services, are the true drivers of economic transformation. These are information and communication technologies, financial services, business and professional services, and transportation and logistics. Why are these 4 sectors so special? To answer that, let's look at history. During the Industrial Revolution, the textiles and clothing industry led economic transformation. Production was along assembly lines with new technologies like cotton gin. Today, production works around supply chains and technologies are digital. These 4 services are the glue connecting value chains and are frontrunners in using digital technologies. But there's more. When other firms use high-quality connected services, they become more competitive. The International Trade Center shows that companies using good logistics services manage their inventories better. Those with good banking services innovate more, and those with good internet access are more likely to have a website. A deal breaker in today's markets. And when companies are more competitive, they export more. Our surveys show that in regions with good connected services, 44% of companies exported, compared to only 19% where these services are weak. Unfortunately, many small firms don't have easy access to these services. The SME Competitiveness Outlook 2022 shows that connected services are a powerful force for transformation. Governments, business support organizations, and companies can take action to turn this promise into a reality. See our report to find out how.
Now that we introduced you to connected services, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Pamela Cook-Hamilton for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to this panel on ITC's flagship report, the SME Competitiveness Outlook. I'm supposed to have a book that I raise. Yes, thank you. Thank you. I know the name Jamaica conjures up images of beautiful sun, sea, sand, of course, lush landscapes, and of course, reggae music and Usain Bolt. I mean, you know. That's what we're known for, and we rely greatly on tourism and creative industries, not just as engines of economic growth, but also as identifying factors to project our culture out there. And I think it has worked effectively. But services are not just critical for small developing states. In fact, they're everywhere, even if they may seem invisible to you. Take those shawls that some of you just won. They may be goods, but most of their value comes from services. From the services of a creative designer who sketched out the pattern, the information technology provider who created an algorithm for that pattern to be imprinted on fabric, to the logistics firm that got the package from the artisan in Burkina Faso, to our event here in Geneva. These are all services. We've just seen in the video that services are crucial, driving growth in most economies, and that some of them have gained greater relevance. The services driving economic transformation in our day and age are those at the forefront of 2 trends, the servicification of supply chains and digitalization. Financial services, ICT, transport and logistics, and business and professional services are the bond connecting firms within supply chains and to digital innovation. For this reason, we call them connected services, and I'm not aware if this nomenclature exists in any other international organization, so if it doesn't, we're claiming it and we're going to copyright it. Thank you. The SME Competitiveness Outlook 2022 finds that connected services are valuable in their own right. Employment is growing rapidly in these sectors, particularly in low-income countries. They also export more, they attract more investment from abroad, and they reinvest a larger share of their revenue in innovation. However, it is their contribution to overall competitiveness that is the key factor in making connected services critical. Our research shows that firms in all sectors are more competitive when they have access to high-quality connected services. This is because they provide the ingredients all firms need to prosper: efficient payment solutions and innovative financing, reliable digital and physical connectivity, and cutting-edge business expertise. And I do want to kind of go off script here a bit, sorry. I'm from a small island developing state in the Caribbean. And the issue of connected services is so important and so critical. When flow and well, it's, yeah, used to be Cable and Wireless, then it became Lime, then it became Flow. Same company. When Flow and Digicel go down, it doesn't matter how much attraction you have in terms of investment. Your internet doesn't work. If your internet doesn't work, it doesn't matter. People can't connect, and if they can't connect, they can't do business, they can't engage, and they can't earn a living. That's the reality that we face now. Their websites are down. We can get as much market access as we want. At the end of the day, there is no sale because you're not connected. So these are bread and butter issues for countries, especially developing countries, that are now utilizing digital platforms to engage in markets. The same is true, of course, for transport and logistics. The same is true for the financial sector. The financial sector to date continues to be very risk averse in our developing countries, and as a result, they retard growth in many of our new sectors. So that's my off thing. So as economies are trying to recover from COVID, tackle climate change and overcome conflict, small business prosperity is at the heart of viable solutions for the future. And those small businesses desperately need connected services, as I just said. Many firms providing these critical functions are themselves small. If we make them more competitive, they can provide better services to other small firms in a virtuous cycle of growth. Our report highlights 4 main competencies that are critical to the competitiveness of connected services companies, but are often lacking. And these are the ability to grow networks, first of all, to innovate, to deepen skills, and leverage finance. In this event, we'll look at how to strengthen these abilities. Many of the necessary actions can be taken by firms themselves, but business support institutions and governments also play a critical role. ITC's flagship report provides a clear vision of how to turn this potential into reality through its Connected Services Competitiveness Business Plan. So connected services may not be the hottest topic of everyday conversation, but to the entrepreneur who's struggling to access funds, deal with an unstable internet connection, or deliver on time in the face of unreliable logistics, they are decisive. Thus, for economies to take off and place SMEs at the core of a sustainable and inclusive recovery, improving access to connected services is indispensable. I encourage all participants to turn their attention towards what we can do to strengthen the firms that connect SMEs to value chains and digital tools. Please download our report and engage in this important conversation that we'll have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. So now we're entering the panel part of our panel, and this is how it's going to work. We are so very pleased to have been able to have Emmanuel from Uganda come and join us today. And like him, there are thousands of small businesses innovating in this for connected services. Unfortunately, we cannot bring them all to Geneva, but we'll bring some of them. We can't bring them in person, so we'll bring them virtually. Instead of me as the moderator asking questions, we're going to show some videos of companies talking about their stories and some of the problems that they face in real life. And then I'll turn to some of my panelists and ask them to provide some reactions and answers to those questions. So starting our tour of connected services with finance. Access to finance is a deal breaker for any company, but especially for small businesses, both for survival and success. Our research in this book has shown that companies with access to good financial services, high quality banks, for instance, were 15 percentage points more likely to innovate and 28 percentage points more likely to be able to present a business plan, which is so critical to attract investors. So let's hear from Alejandro in Costa Rica.
Hello, my name is Alejandro Vega, and I'm the founder of Juli, a health tech startup out of Costa Rica. We now have more than 100 employees and have more than 10,000 doctor customers ranging from Mexico all the way down to Panama. Starting out of a small country like Costa Rica, we had to think about international expansion from day one. This is because investors are primarily interested in companies operating in larger markets. And these sources of funding are critical to software companies as we tend to be unprofitable at first, making it almost impossible to obtain conventional loans. But expanding internationally is not easy, creating a situation in which you need financial support to expand internationally and then attract additional funds. So my question to you is, what financial solutions are available to smaller markets for companies such as startups and small businesses so they can help us grow and cross the threshold that will make us more attractive to new investors? Thank you very much.
So let me start with you, Emmanuel, as you have a financial technology company in Uganda. How do the solutions provided by your company support other small businesses in accessing finance?
Thank you, Barbara, and the ICT team for having me here. Before I answer the question, I think it's important to understand what a small business is and what pushes an individual to start a business. What do they want to achieve, and who do they serve? It's difficult to have a solution if you don't understand the problem. Let me go to a society that I've grown up in and that I know, and that's Uganda. We have about 400,000 students that graduate every year, but every year there are only 9,000 jobs available for them. So these young people are forced to start small businesses to provide basic needs to their families. 90% of these entrepreneurs have no business skills, they have no knowledge, they have no collateral, they have no connections. These businesses are mainly located in peri-urban and rural areas, and they serve the low-income people. This means that access to financial services is critical for their survival because their margins are low, because the customer base that they serve have low purchasing power. Now, if I could just bring you back, take your attention away. In 2018, I was running a bakery in Tanzania, and we were selling 300 donuts in 30 minutes. The business was growing too fast for even I, as a founder, running the business. And I walked to the nearest bank in my t-shirt and jeans and sneakers. I remember, I'll never forget the look of the lady at the reception that she gave me. She literally looked at me and said, "We don't serve customers like you in this bank." And I said, "But how would you categorize me? You've just looked at me, and based on what you're seeing is what you're judging me." And I walked out of the bank. And that day onwards, I thought, how many entrepreneurs like me are being affected? And this is the reason why we gave birth to ChapChap. We currently are formalizing small businesses using financial tools and services that create reliable financial profiles. And to date, these businesses that we are associated with have transacted worth more than $200 million in the last 3 years, doing sales and payments digitally. And to date, these businesses have been able to access credit worth $20 million using their data without collateral. Some of these businesses still believe it's magic because their TV has not been taken, their cars have not been taken, they have not asked for land titles, just their data, and they've been able to access credit. And interestingly, if I bring you to an interesting individual I met in 2019, was a young gentleman called Michael. He was running his shop on a table. This table is literally where I'm sitting is big, something small, and he had his phones lined up, and he was serving his community. And Michael's vision was to have the largest accessory outlet in his community. But that had been a dream for so many years that he couldn't afford. When we got in, we showed him what the tool that we had built would enable him to do based on the number of customers that he's servicing, how much money he's earning, and literally data that he had never imagined that you'd have access to. What is so shocking, in 3 months running onto our platform, Michael was able to access unsecured credit. To date, as I speak, Michael runs the largest accessory outlet in his hometown. And that's exciting because that had not been done for so many years. And today it's possible. So just because of data that is coming off the platform, today Michael's dream has come true. Now you can imagine how many young people, women out there like Michael who are genuine and want to run these businesses but don't have access to financial services. And that's what ChapChap is here to provide.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for bringing those personal stories and showing us how you're changing the lives of small businesses, one Michael at a time. And I'll turn to Payal from Mastercard to ask you, how can we scale? How can we reach more Michaels? What is the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth doing to help scale businesses like these?
Absolutely, and thank you to the ITC for convening such an important conversation on such an important topic. So what we're doing at the Center for Inclusive Growth is really working at the institutional level to strengthen the entrepreneurial support ecosystem. And so what we're doing specifically is we're working with financial service providers, which includes lenders, to help them not only think more digitally, but actually think about the needs and constraints of micro and small businesses specifically. So taking a more human-centered design approach. So let me just give you two examples of this. The first is we have a partnership with Accion, and Accion is helping financial service providers, FSPs, think more digitally. So what we've been doing in partnership with Accion is supporting the digital transformation of 9 financial service providers in 8 countries: Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, India, Indonesia, Mexico, and Nigeria. And what we've done is we've helped these financial service providers launch new products catering to the needs of micro and small businesses in their communities. So these include digital loans, digital lending platforms, just-in-time loans. And what we've seen is that the uptake has been extremely positive with increased levels of digital adoption among micro and small businesses. And we all know that digital adoption has really been a lifeline during COVID. And when we did an evaluation just a couple of months ago, what we found is if you digitalize the financial service providers, it leads to much better economic outcomes for their clients, which are the micro and small businesses. So in 5 countries, Nigeria, India, Guatemala, Bolivia, and Ecuador, 56% of the product users attributed improvements to their business, and they saw increased revenues thanks to the digital products they implemented, and 36% of customers saw an increase in their income over the previous 12 months. We also saw that digitalization contributes to financial resilience, which is what we know is so critical right now. Financial resilience was very weak pre-pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated it, and now we're sitting in a situation with increased inflation, energy crisis, supply chain disruptions, and so financial resilience is so critically important. And what we saw is that digitalization in India helped clients, micro and small businesses, resolve key financial challenges and improve their ability to weather financial volatility. So that's example one, Barbara, that if we digitalize at the financial service provider level, it actually increases outcomes for small business clients. The second thing I'll just say briefly is that we're helping lenders and financial service providers think more humanly. What are the true needs of the micro and small businesses they're serving? And we're helping them think specifically about how to better serve women entrepreneurs. So in partnership with CARE and UBank in Pakistan, we created a loan product that used gold jewelry as collateral because most women in Pakistan didn't have ability to have the land deed or the house title. In Peru, with CARE and Financiera Confianza, we redesigned a loan so that it didn't require their spouse to co-sign. And in Vietnam, with CARE and Canal Circle, we actually created an app that allowed the women entrepreneurs not only to manage their loans and stay on top of their installment payments, but then created a data flow which improved their credit history and their considered credit worthiness. So just a few examples, Barbara, of what we're doing to try to unlock this access to finance to these micro and small businesses.
Thank you, Payal. And listening to you and Manuel, I'm thinking how digitalization is really helping bridge this finance gap, which is a wonderful segue for our second connected service, which is ICT. And as you said, this was a lifeline for many small businesses during COVID. And not only that, it allowed them to succeed. Our surveys show that 11% of companies that went online during COVID actually increased their sales. So that's quite interesting. So to me, the question is, how do we help the small ICT service providers grow so they can provide these critical services to others? So with that, let's hear from Bashiru in Sierra Leone.
Hi, my name is Bashiru Mansare, CEO of Open Space from Sierra Leone. We often see small businesses trying to learn from large companies, but small firms can also help large companies too. For example, my ICT company helped a large utility provider move from a local hosting to a cloud hosting, so they will not lose access to their emails and websites, especially during electricity outage. But it is difficult for small companies to attract large potential clients. I was restricted initially to working with companies that knew me and trusted me personally. How can small service companies be more visible and increase their network and credibility, especially with large clients?
I think, Emmanuel, I'm going to go back to you because you're featured in our report, and there you talk about how you were able to leverage social media to increase the visibility of your business. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Barbara. So I come from an informal sector, and in 2016 is the first time I had an opportunity of understanding the direction of technology. And this is how I came up with the idea with my partners to build Chap Chap. I don't know if you followed the news in Uganda. We have had scenarios where the internet has been shut down for a couple of days, and for the first time, it felt like the world had evaporated. And during the lockdown COVID pandemic, before the COVID pandemic, 99% of all our sales were happening door to door. So we had salespeople who go into the market and onboard businesses because they're not tech literate, so they need to be guided onto the platform. We at the blink of closing shop because during the lockdown we couldn't access the customers, we couldn't onboard, we couldn't pay salaries. But luckily enough, and thanks to ITC again, we had a consultant who had taken us through in terms of how we can harness the power of social media to onboard customers. Before we started using social media, we were doing about 200 to 300 businesses monthly. And when we understood the power of social media from the consultant through ITC, we started onboarding between 1,000 businesses to 1,500 businesses monthly. By the time the lockdown was uplifted, we were probably the only, I would say, company in that space that was still alive. The competition had actually closed shop. And this basically showed to us the power of what technology could brought to our table. And not only did it just having social media presence bring us the customers, but it allowed us to access feedback. You can't evolve, you can't grow without feedback. It's very difficult. Most of the times you understand that as a founder, you bring a product into existence, and the next thing is now the customers to help you grow that product. And that's why you see the multi-billion-dollar businesses that exist in the world today are running based on customer feedback. We actually tell them this product would look nice if it looked this way. And this is what today Chap Chap was able to grasp. So having an online presence is a must for small businesses today. It's the only way to reach the customer of today and tomorrow. I would go as far as saying that if you have no online presence, it's a disadvantage for your business, and you're missing out on a lot of data that will help you make the right business decisions. Businesses that have access to customer data analytics are better positions to grow and scale. While I was at school, my economics teacher used to say that business is all about location and location. And today I would say the business location for any business to thrive today is online, because that's where the customer is. Thank you.
Thanks again, Emmanuel. So I'll turn to you, Vanessa. We just heard that business location is online. And I know Curacao has just endorsed its national export strategy with the support of ITC. And it's a very forward-looking strategy. A lot of it relies on good ICT services. And how do you help these small businesses that can't do it alone, right? It's very hard for them to do it alone. So how can you help them attract more clients, large clients, as we heard from Bashiro in the video? Can you share some solutions that you have implemented in Curacao to help increase the visibility of small businesses in this area?
Yes, thank you very much, Barbara. Thanks to ITC for inviting me this afternoon. In Curacao, 95% of the companies are SMEs. So it's very difficult for SMEs to indeed attract or capture the attention of larger companies. And so I can understand and the issue raised by Bashiru, and it's very relevant. What happened in Curacao, I'm giving the example of the IT sector. A dozen of IT companies approached our ministry, and they wanted to talk about exporting their services. We, together with them, we initiated a strategy in the sense that we told them they need to organize themselves in order to strengthen each other, in order to collaborate with each other, and also to be able to capture the attention as a collective effort. So they organize themselves, and they are the Curaçao's Tech Export Association, and they go by the name SIMIA. SIMIA is an acronym for Software Industry Making Impact Abroad, but in our language, Papiamento, SIMIA means seat. So SIMIA was established, and they collaborated and worked with us in realizing the IT strategy, together with some other big companies in the IT sector, the telecommunications sector. So they did an analysis of their sector, and they captured the attention of the government in the sense that now, and with the strategy that was realized, we are aligned in creating the ecosystem where the tech exporters are able to develop themselves, get the support from every stakeholder in the country, especially the government, for example, education, labor, financial sector, legal support, in order for them to be able to do business internationally. So they collaborate in the sense that when a contract is brought in and there is a lot of expertise and knowledge required, they can work together and complement each other and deliver the service that they need to deliver. So that's one of the things that we can share with how the small IT businesses, by collaborating and working together, are capturing markets that before and individually they were not able to capture.
You raise a very interesting point that we also highlight in the report. It's about growing your networks, right? And networks is not just about the buyers and the suppliers, but it's about your peers, yes, especially for small firms facing larger clients that will require sometimes capacity that goes above and beyond what they can do. So it's really about the entire ecosystem. Yes. And in this ecosystem, we have other connected services. So let me turn to the third one, which is transport and logistics. And just like ICT, it perhaps negatively showed how important it is in the last few years, right? Because every company in all surveys that we have ran in the last 2 years have said that logistics services have been the biggest impact during COVID. But on the upside, 78% of companies that said, well, no, I have good logistics services, they manage their inventories quite well. And this compares to like 36% of companies that do not have access to good logistics services. And this is very intuitive, right? If you know you have good logistics, you don't have to build up large inventories, or you don't suddenly find yourself with very low inventories because trucks are stuck somewhere. But the transport and logistics industry is very, very influenced by regulation, like many services, but this one it hits particularly heavy. As the sector increasingly uses digital technologies, new regulatory challenges emerge. So I would like us to hear from one of the so-called unicorns in this environment.
Hello, my name is Felipe Capella, co-founder and CEO of LoadSmart. LoadSmart is a freight technology company designed to help shippers and carriers price, book, and move freight more efficiently. Today, we work with most of the Fortune 100 shippers and have raised $200 million in our Series D, valuing the company at $1.3 billion. As we expand our technology into cross-border freight transportation, regulations can either incentivize and speed up technology deployment and support our mission, or discourage us and hamper innovation. A year ago, we launched a platform called Flatbed Messenger to match empty trucks with shippers needing to transport goods in a partnership with the Home Depot. This means that the retailer can now share spare capacity of its own private trucks with other shippers. In the last year alone, the platform has meant 1.9 million fewer miles have been driven by empty trucks. Because of joint regulations between Canada and the US, we're able to offer this service to those who move over-the-road freight between these two countries. That's an example of regulatory collaboration. But when we try to deploy our technology into other countries, issues like different data privacy regulatory frameworks and the hyper-bureaucratic regulation in international customs brokerage make it quite difficult to deploy cross-country trade technology elsewhere.
So Pamela, I'm going to turn to you. Philippe runs what we could call a unicorn in advanced economy. And they could bring people in to help them navigate this regulatory maze. And he still faces difficulties. We can only imagine what small businesses in developing and least developed countries face. And ITC works with governments, business support organizations to help countries streamline regulations because this is so costly to small businesses. How do you make sure that the regulations that are enacted consider the needs and the constraints of small businesses?
Thank you, Barbara. And I really like the comment made that regulation can incentivize and it can disincentivize. it's a double-edged sword in a way. And it's a very tricky issue. You know, like it says here, 45% of the transport and logistics firms in a business survey that ITC did in Vietnam, Niger, Ghana, and Bahrain cited regulatory obstacles to exporting as one of their major issues in terms of non-tariff measures. And on top of that, SMEs tend to be even more disadvantaged because they're smaller, because they're less able to meet the needs, and the larger businesses can easily pay somebody to do it, and that's how it works. So I think as a consequence, you know, the views of small businesses are not included, and this is part of the problem. And so what we need to have is a more inclusive process. Their views aren't integrated, their access to information is limited, and their regulatory compliance is 2 times less than bigger companies. So they're already at a disadvantage. I'm not against effective regulation, let me be clear. Just so WTO doesn't, you know. Exactly, I mean, you know, Dr. Ngozi, no, we're not saying no regulation. But we need to have balanced regulation, and we need to have inclusive regulation that actually is able to take into account the various needs out there. So ITC has an approach to policy reform which has two main principles. First, it's reform that's SME centered in its design and in its implementation. Because if it is not, then it tends to veer towards the bigger companies, and as a result does not meet the needs. The second is that we try to cater to the needs of the SMEs through government's work with them. So for example, we help in the setting up of trade facilitation committees on the ground that actually help the SMEs come in and represent and have a voice in the decisions that are made and the policies and regulations that are enacted. I think the other thing is, projects that we do are also SME centric. We try to ensure that, for example, we've done trade facilitation portals in 17 countries. And if we can do more, we will, because that helps to regularize the process by which SMEs are able to trade. We also look at trade information data at various African border crossings, because as he mentioned, the border crossing issue always becomes a problem. And there's nobody more defensive than customs on a borderline. There's this, I think they'd make great linebackers or defensive linesmen, and just take you out. It doesn't matter. So that's really important, and we call that on-the-go support, so that at the customs we actually help them go through the process of crossing that border. And these principles apply equally to other spaces. It's not just the digital space, but also to new regulatory challenges emerging, as you referred to, the issues of, cybersecurity, data capture. All these are problems that we are going to have to continue to address. So in closing, I'd just like to say that, many countries are lagging in the regulatory framework, mainly because it's not just a question of cost, it's also a question of capacity. And so how do we work with them to build in that capacity, but also build in a system whereby the regulatory requirements are also aligned to international norms, so that it's easier for cross-border trade to take place. Because once you're aligned, then you're able to make that transition without all the obstacles in between. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Pamela. And Vanessa, I'd like you to complement a little bit this discussion, because our research has found that it's not just the content of the regulation that's problematic, it's how it's applied, right? It can be sometimes even more difficult for companies to comply with a simple regulation than the regulation itself. So this raises the issue of ease of implementation. How does Curacao make sure that companies are informed of impending changes and any policy changes, so they are prepared to comply?
Well, Barbara, information provision to businesses is a big challenge. It needs to be presented in a way that it's simple and easy to understand, because the SME, they don't have people to do it for them, or they don't have the money to pay a consultant to do it for them. So sometimes they need to do it themselves. So access to that information needs to be simple and easy to get. And they must be able to also pose questions easily and receive an answer also very rapidly in order for them to be able to continue. Well, the government is in negotiations with the Curacao Chamber of Commerce, which is a public body, a public chamber where registration is mandatory. So every single business in Curacao is registered at the chamber. So together with them, we are going to organize the information provision and make sure that there is access to information and people to answer and support the SMEs in their quest and in the implementation of policies. Curacao is acceding the WTO as an independent member which means that regulations must be communicated very well to the companies. We also are negotiating bilateral trade agreements with countries in our region, and that also brings regulations and access information that they need to have. So by collaborating and by incentivizing and also supporting and strengthening the chamber. By the way, I worked there for 17 years, so SMEs were the companies that I worked with the most. We are able to organize the information and make it accessible to them. Online, of course, as much as possible, but we also see that SMEs need someone to talk to. So to make sure that we have trained and skilled people to support and give them information. I would also like to point out that it is in the interest of governments to ensure that the local companies are informed of and supported to adapt efficiently to new policies and regulations, because then things will move, much better, and the economy can develop itself much better because your enterprises, your private sector is well informed and up to date with regards to policies and regulations. I want to give another example of how we communicated change of policies and regulations. We have a free trade zone in Curacao for a number of years already, almost 45 years. And it used to also have services included. But due to international regulations, we had to exclude services from the free trade zones, which, of course, brought a lot of trouble for a lot of companies that had invested in infrastructure, in IT, in buildings, etc. So we invited them, and we started the discussions on how can we help them to continue with their businesses. So together with them, we developed a way to provide them with the necessary incentives to be able to continue their work and to also be able to export more. So their buildings became business centers, and the government made it possible for services, companies that deliver services, especially the exporters of services, to establish themselves anywhere on the island and still get the benefits, the tax benefits, because they are exporting and because of the substance that they are bringing at the table. So that is one example on how we did it. And we are going to change our whole economic zones regime, the special economic zones regimes. And they are at the table because there are still things that we can do under the new regime. But basically, the fact that we sat down with them and we communicated and we came to a solution together helped the implementation of the regulations very rapidly.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I love that you said that now you're sort of retrofitting some of these buildings to be business centers for services providers, which gives me yet another good segue for the last connected service, which is business and professional services, which is a very, very large category that sometimes seems very confusing, right? But those are the people that provide expert advice, legal advice, management consulting. These are all business and professional services. And many of these companies are led by young people and by women. One interesting fact that we found in this research is that women-led and youth-led companies in services tend to be just as competitive as non-youth-led and men-led companies. But that doesn't mean they have it easy, right? Because even though they are just as competitive, they face other sorts of obstacles that prevent them from breaking into international markets. So I would like to invite you to listen to our last business voice, Imrana from Bangladesh.
Hello, my name is Imrana Khan, CEO of Supertel Bangladesh. It is a business process outsourcing company where we employ 70% women in our workforce. My company makes other companies more competitive as they can outsource many back office services, IT process, customer services to us and focus on their core business. But even though we provide critical business services, starting out as a young woman entrepreneur was not easy. Getting clients was very difficult as many did not take me seriously or felt more confident with a male business partner. My question is, how can you help young and women entrepreneurs build skills they need and overcome barriers to thrive in a modern services? Thank you.
A common story, unfortunately. Payal, as head of social impact, I understand that one of your missions is to help support underserved entrepreneurs. How is the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth helping women-led businesses thrive in this services?
Yeah, absolutely, Barbara. So, you know, we've had a thread throughout this conversation around digital, and I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that increasingly the economy is the digital economy, and the digital economy is the economy. And so what we found is that digitalization is a journey, and this is especially true for women entrepreneurs. And so through our 9 years of working on this, what we surfaced are two main insights. The first is when it comes to women entrepreneurs, you really have to blend touch and tech. You can't just assume that small businesses, especially our data shows women businesses, are going to adopt technology. And so one of the things that we've done in India is we've established chambers of commerce for women entrepreneurs in rural settings. And this goes back to the point, Barbara, that you made around networks. Networks are incredibly important as a social capital. And what we found globally is that entrepreneurs are much likely to trust each other rather than trust banks, big private multinational companies, heads of NGOs. And so when we facilitated the creation of these rural chambers of commerce, what we were able to do was introduce technology and have peer leaders talk about their own experiences, their own bottlenecks, their own challenges, and their own cost benefit analysis about whether this was worth it or not. So we looked at digital inventory management, digital bookkeeping, and of course digital payments. And what happened was, because it was in person, which had the touch, but also looking at the tech, there was more inherent trust, because that's another thing that we've seen across all of our programs is that technology adoption requires trust, which isn't inherent. And so we really have to work to earn that. The second example I'll give you is in Indonesia and also in the Middle East. We created a platform called Micro Mentor. And what it was a micro business will put out statements to say something like, I need help writing a business plan, or I want to better use social media marketing. And another business owner will respond and say, I've done this, let me help you. So we're facilitating this peer-to-peer communication. And even though it's initially established through a digital platform, we find that is sufficient enough touch to actually drive digital adoption. And what we saw was that those businesses that participated on the platform had a 10% higher survival rate and were actually creating one additional job compared to entrepreneurs that weren't on that platform. So that's the first thing I'd share, is that as we think about digitalization, we really have to blend touch and tech, especially when it comes to women entrepreneurs. The second thing, and this is more of a kind of an ecosystem message, is that when we design programs, when we design products, when we design digital financial services, we have to be really gender intentional. And we really have to be sensitive to the needs of women entrepreneurs. And one of the things that has really been on my mind is the real need to recognize that childcare is a huge barrier to a lot of women and their ability to access economic opportunities. So one of the things that we're doing in Poland, recently launched, is actually providing displaced Ukrainian women who want to start or restart their businesses free childcare so that they can actually focus on their short, medium, and long-term economic livelihoods. So just a few examples and lessons from our work, Barbara, to ensure that digitization is inclusive and the digital economy is inclusive.
Thank you, Payal. And Pamela, I couldn't close this round without coming to you, because ITC does so much for women entrepreneurs, for youth with She Trades and the Youth in Trade program. So can you share a little bit about the experiences from these programs in making trade and digital trade more inclusive?
Thanks, Barbara. I really like that terminology, gender intentional, because a lot of times people think policy is gender blind, and it never is. And if we're not gender intentional, then we make policies and rules that appear on their face to be unbiased, but in reality, they actually become an impediment to business and to trade. So let me just start off by saying, first of all, that creating inclusion is hard. It's not popular, it's not, sexy, but it's non-negotiable, at least for me. It's a non-negotiable of life that I think needs to be addressed more holistically, more directly, and with much more ambition than we currently have. And that's why, despite the fact that ITC has a very good track record in both gender and youth empowerment, I've been pushing my staff to actually do more. How do we actually ramp up our offer in this area? How do we push to ensure that we go beyond where we are and not be satisfied? And I just wanted to make a quick comment on the issue of what you mentioned about childcare. It's something I've raised several times in various fora, so I'll raise it again. Why not? And it has to do with our own system. Even we're not talking about trade here, but we're talking about women's equality and employment. And it matters, because I did not realize that we have a policy where if a woman has a child in the UN system, she can go to 80%, right? Which sounds wonderful, and it really is a wonderful facility. But then what that 80% does is you miss one day of work a week because you have to look after your child. Or in Switzerland, many schools close on Wednesday, so somebody has to stay home. And so who is it usually? The mother. But what does that mean in effect? In effect, what it means is that her ability to get a promotion is 20% reduced by the fact that she's not there on a Wednesday, by the fact that she's at 80%. It means that she's not fully present. And in the entire Preny to, is it Secheron Gate? There is not one space that a mother can leave her child for 1 hour, for 2 hours. And what does this say about our system, about our international organization system with respect to women? But that's just my pet peeve. I'm just throwing it out there. If anybody wants to, we can work on that. But it sends a message that it's not just about the poor lady doing, work on the side or doing trade or doing informal trade. It's about us. It's about all of us in here as well. So having said that, so I've launched what I call the moonshots, and the moonshots are literally about what JFK said. We want to go to the moon. That's where we want to go, and we're not doing it because it's easy, but because it's hard. But it's necessary and it's non-negotiable. So inclusivity, in my view, is the moonshot of our time. This is our parents built the structure of this international trading scheme. We built out what we call the modernization of this and the acceptance of multilateralism. The next generation is going to be what we call the inclusive generation. You guys. Yeah, we're old, we're on our way out. So it's the young people who are going to have to drive this and own it. And I think one of the things that we have to be clear on is the kinds of barriers women face. And I think you all know this, you've heard this before, the access to finance issue. And I really like what you said about, using gold as collateral, because a lot of women don't have the kind of collateral necessary. Secondly, what you mentioned about men having to sign. I'll never forget, I was maybe 40 something, and I went to buy a house. And when I went to the bank and I brought all my banking information and my job, I was fully employed. I'm a lawyer. I earn my own money. He asked me where my husband was. This was in 2012. I mean, I thought, are you kidding me? So it's still there, very much so. And this was in a developed country. So if it happened, so these are the issues that people face. And the value chains and markets is also another challenge. So that's why we have the She Trades online platform, and it really helps women to engage in markets, connect to global markets. It helps them also in terms of access to finance, and also ITC market analysis tools. And it also enables them to learn different skill sets. We have over 70 courses online that help women gain certain skills. In addition to that, we have the youth programs. And youth entrepreneurs, of course, are among the biggest services startups. They are energetic, they're ambitious, and they're courageous. And they don't see the world the way we see the world. And I think that's what makes them even a greater constituency to work with, because they see the world differently. They don't see barriers where we see barriers. I look at my son sometimes, and they'll just get online and play with anybody from anywhere. And I'm like, you don't know these people, But, the way we see the world and the way they see the world, or you guys see the world, it's more global. It's yes, I have this friend in Japan that I'm playing chess with, we didn't grow up like that. And so I think they're going to take us further than we need to go. I look at our initiative in Gambia. We actually set up a mini grant scheme targeting grassroots entrepreneurs so they could purchase equipment, materials and permits and other business critical inputs. And then, for the young Gambian entrepreneurs and MSMEs as well who are unable to access bank credit, we did a mini loan scheme. And that offers a credit products at reduced interest and against very modest collateral. And so ITC also provides partial loan guarantees for that. And then finally, for the high growth enterprises, we supported the establishment of the Gambia Angel Investor Network, the very first of its kind in the country. And this offers, Gambian entrepreneurs access to both capital and mentorship. So let me close by just saying that, the first step is supporting understanding. If we don't understand what the problem is, we can't fix it. And a lot of times we tend to think that we don't have a problem because it's not obvious. But if you connect the dots, the reason why there's such a lack of, going back to my thing, the reason why there's such an absence of women at the top in our organizations is because at that P3 level, when they're 31, 32, and they get pregnant, they are sidelined out of the system, not deliberately, but by policies meant to help, but in the grand scheme tend to also. So childcare is important even for professional women, especially for professional women. So thank you. Yes. Sorry, my soapbox.
This was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. We're coming close to the end of the session, and this was so rich that I think I will need some help from my fellow panelists to close. Mm-hmm. So I'll invite each one of you to perhaps give one message. What would you want everybody that's here today, that joined us today, to come out of this session with? Emmanuel, may I count on you to start this round in one thought? What do you want people here to know?
I think it's important to leave this meeting understanding the magnitude of the topic we're discussing today about connectivity services, and this is real. It's very difficult to comprehend something you have not gone through, but it's important that we enable these micro and small, medium enterprises to be able to have access to these services for them to grow. And and why I say it's real, I want to give you an example. Sorry, just to add on to that. We currently at ChapChap, we do about 6 million sales per month. And this is growing at 18% month in, month out. But what is so interesting, until today, my bank cannot give me credit because they want me to show them a building. and a tie. And yet, 60% of the businesses that are using our platform have been able to access $20 million the last 2 years. It's insane. So these problems are real. And we need, especially for the developed countries, we definitely need your input. We need you probably on the ground to see it for yourself, because then you get to understand how big this is. And otherwise, I'd like to thank you all for having us, and hopefully we could collaborate. We want to expand our solution to more countries, more businesses, and as a fintech, we are raising money to enable us reach more SMEs, to enable them grow and prosper. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Maybe I'll go to my right, Pyle.
Sure. So my takeaway and perhaps call to action is, I think we put so much onus on the micro and small business themselves, and we forget that in addition to being cash poor, they're time poor. Mm-hmm. And so we as an ecosystem need to do a lot more to take on some of this. We can't assume or expect a small business to go spend all their time skilling up, training up, digitalizing. So what can we do to make things easier, simple, and faster, and take some of that burden off the shoulders of micro and small business owners?
Thank you, Pyle. Vanessa?
Yes, I think that SMEs need to get the support from institutions, trade promotion institutions, or any institutions from that kind, but also from governments. And we need to also, I speak from the perspective of government, stimulate the companies to also collaborate, work together to achieve certain business ambitions in order to be successful. I think next to educating and supporting the SMEs, I think governments and financial institutions also need to be educated on what are the needs of the SMEs in the world that we are living in. The world is changing. Digitalization is something that we cannot avoid, and it will transform our economies and communities. So the export strategy that ITC helped us develop is a reform to the economy of Curacao, but it also is a development plan for the economy of Curacao. And we are going to implement it and make sure that Curaçao's economy will be thriving and be successful again as it used to be in years ago. So thanks ITC for the support, and thanks also for the invitation today.
Thank you for joining us. Pamela?
I think my key takeaway is get connected. Get connected, stay connected. But on a more general basis, I'd say be bold, be ambitious, shoot for the moon, and don't take no for an answer. Thank you.
I won't dare add anything to that, except for joining us for a cocktail right outside, download our report, and engage in this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.